Hello everybody, in this video I would like to discuss a bit about this fantasy novel Phantastes, or Phantastes, A Fairy Romance by George MacDonald, the Scottish author. And as we all know, George MacDonald and his novels were great inspirations for both J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And the primary one was inspired rather with The Princess and the Goblin, and the traces of those inspirations we may find scattered along A Hobbit. And the latter was primarily inspired by this very novel, Phantastes. And he as well labelled, to use that word, George MacDonald as a grandfather of fantasy literature style, as Tolkien was labelled as a father of modern fantasy literature. My impressions regarding the writing style of George MacDonald is that the style is fluent and with passages of beautifully descriptive prose and all but flamboyant or redundant. And I dare say that this novel is a genuine gem of fantasy literature, and it conserves the purity of the primeval genre of fantasy literature. And another impression is that names for George MacDonald are rather futile regarding the protagonists. For merely one character is named, and that's a main protagonist. His name is Adonis, similar to Greek god Adonis, but it's with O, Adonis. And he's a lad of his 21 age, and his father died. And in one of his drawers he found an apparition which turned out to be a fairy, and in some kind of vision the fairy presented all the beauty of the fairyland and invited him to visit fairyland. And the next day the lad awakened in his room, but that was not much of his room, I would say, but rather he found himself amid the forest, and his legs were dug into a stream. Thus, within a dream, he entered that fairyland, and we do not know how exactly he found himself there, because no portal or door or some hidden passages aren't revealed in the narrative. And on his way he mostly encountered with female characters whom occasionally alarmed him for some preceding perils. And the first perils were the spirits of the forest entrapped into the trees. That was malevolent ash tree, and the vicious female spirit entrapped into the alder tree. And on the other side we have a benevolent beech tree spirits which saved him from previous two spirits in one of the scenes. And there is one scene which is quite similar to that in The Lord of the Rings, when Gimli asks for Galadriel's tresses. And here the Adonis are bestowed with saplings of the beech tree, which ought to be some sort of amulet for his further traverses. And along his way, as he's continue his traverses, he found himself in a cottage of an ogress, and he alarmed him not to enter the single room which is locked in that grim hut, but he opened that door, and there encountered with his own evil shadow, which from then on became his grim follower. And that scene reminds me most of the scene from Ursula Le Guin, The Wizard of Earthsea, where we have a similar scene with the shadow and the lad that was chased by his own shadow, as we have with Adonis in Phantastes. And it is rather peculiar to say that narrative does not burst with the action which is mandatory for modern fantasy, and the encounters along the way with the main character are much randomly situated, and those characters that emerge from nowhere along the way of Adonis, to say, spent on a rather meticulous way, because all those characters have their role within the main character, and after that they disappear, or they reappear again in some part of the story which is connected with the previous parts where they emerged in the story. And in one of the segments, which is the largest segment of the novel, Adonis found himself amidst a fairy castle, and it's a lofty, immense castle, vacant, mostly vacant, with large corridors, and he there found himself into a chamber which is much similar to his own lodgings, and lingered there for many time. And another crucial moment is that chasing for a female paragon along the entire novel, Adonis encounters with a marble lady, with her spirit entrapped into the marble, and releases her from that prison with his singing. And after that, for almost the entire novel, he was chasing that spirit, craving for her company and her beauty. And in that very castle which I mentioned, there was one big chamber with the statues of marble, whom he found that were dancing on some music, but on the moments when he wasn't regarding them, and on the very moment when he glanced on some of those statues, they stay put in place where he found them previously. And among these statues he found him Marble Lady, and began to chase her. She ran into some underground passage like a white rabbit in Alice, and he chased the lady through the underground passage, and there he found himself among the kobolds. Kobolds are somewhat of the dwarfs from the Germanic mythology and the Germanic folk stories, and they were mocking him, and he was entrapped into that underground passage, and by a mere chance he found himself in a boat which took him on the surface and to an island which was quite isolated and encircled with the sea, with a single isthmus which was connecting the entire shore. And there he found another lady, which was, as he described, of a young countenance, yet her eyes were senescent. And soon he found out that that cottage had 4 doors, and each door is named different. The door of tears, the door of sight, the door of dismay, and the door of timeless. And here is the second allegory. The first was when the Adonis encountered with his own shadow, and as we all know, the postulates of Jungian psychiatry is on combinations of dualism with person and its shadow. And here we have a shadow that's pursuing the person whose shadow it is, that may that may indicate of some clandestine unconscious facts that are hidden in our unconsciousness, and occasionally it emerges on the surface of our mind and torments us then. This second allegory with these 4 chambers and 4 doors was a connection with our previous memories and our fears that we couldn't manage to deal with in total. The first door, the door of tears, took back the protagonist to his childhood, where he met his late brother and came back into the cottage weeping. The second door, the door of sighs, proved him that his paragon that he's pursuing the entire novel, the paragon of beauty, that marble lady, isn't quite suitable for him to say, because she loves the another person, and that's Sir Percival. And the third door took him to the funeral of one of his dear persons, while the fourth door led him to a task that ought to be finished as he would continue on his traversing on the fairyland. And that task was to help 2 brothers. Those were the princes of a country which was tantalized by 3 giant brothers, and he found himself when opened the fourth door in some isolated tower where the brothers were forging their armor, and he entered the brotherhood and helped those lads to chase with their enemies, and during that battle they were killed, and he was promoted into Sir Percival's squire. And the last task that was put on him is that, again, an allegory, and it's settled in an old temple that is amidst the forest where he continued to pass by. And in that temple he seized some ritual in progress and killed some apparition that was on the altar. After that he was killed himself, and deep in a tomb where his body is laid, his spirit was finally free and emerged on the surface. And there he became aware that he awakened in the vicinity of his own castle and his own home, and there his sisters told him that he was absent for 21 days. You see the perils, 21 days was the amount of his absence, although his impressions were that he was absent for 21 years, and 21 years is exactly a number of his present age. And when I finally closed the book, I was immersed into my own thoughts regarding what I read, and my impressions were rather mixed, because as I said, the novel is full of absurd scenes, and the characters weren't much developed as we expect to be in from a present point of view, but having in mind the publication date of this novel, and that's 1858. The novel is quite grounded on chivalric romances, as well as I said, the legends of the King Arthur, and of course with the Spencer's Fairy Queen. And it is my cordial recommendations for all those who like that kind of the, to say, old-fashioned fantasy novels, which are, to say, much naive or nowadays styles, which, as I said, grow out in some monstrously and disfigured form of fantasy novel.